Welcome to another No Swear Gamer video, this time going over a brief history of Nintendo. Nintendo was founded on September 23, 1889 in Kyoto, Japan by Fusajiro Yamachi, whose name I probably just slaughtered. Just to give you an idea of how old Nintendo is, in the year of its founding, Benjamin Harrison was the President of the United States, the Eiffel Tower opened in France, and both Washington and Montana officially became states. Nintendo also predates video games by about 60 years. Nintendo started as a card company selling Hanafuda cards, which were handmade by painting mulberry tree bark. Nintendo would later make a modern set of Hanafuda cards available through their Club Nintendo program. You can also play a game called Koi Koi with the cards in the Nintendo DS game Clubhouse Games. The Nintendo Playing Card Company focused on making playing cards until 1963, when it was renamed the Nintendo Company and began experimenting in other areas of business, including running taxis, selling instant rice, and even selling the Chiritori vacuum cleaner, which can be seen in WarioWare on the Game Boy Advance. However, a big breakthrough was made when an extending arm made by maintenance engineer Gunpei Yokoi was noticed and turned into the Ultra Hand toy, selling over 1 million units and later immortalized in the WiiWare game Grill Off with Ultra Hand. Gunpei would go on to make other toys for Nintendo, including a baseball throwing machine, Love Tester, and with help from Sharp, would create the first light gun game for home use, the Nintendo Beam Gun game series, that would later lead to the NES Zapper and also show up in WarioWare on the GBA. Nintendo also worked with Magnavox on the light gun for their Magnavox Odyssey, which was the first commercially available video game system in 1972 in the United States. In 1974, Nintendo got the rights to distribute the Magnavox Odyssey in Japan. Starting in 1977, Nintendo began to release the Color TV game series of systems that did not take cartridges, but instead had games built into them. In the 1970s, Nintendo also began entering arcades. According to some sources, EVR Race was their first arcade game, even though they may have had some light gun arcade games come out earlier, which included the original Wild Gunman, which featured video instead of sprites. Wild Gunman would later be remade for both the NES and arcades with sprites and would appear in the movie Back to the Future 2. The 80s really defined Nintendo as a video game giant. As 1980 began, Gunpei Yokoi's Game & Watch LCD portable game series debuted, with the double-screen versions foreshadowing the Nintendo DS. 1981 brought out what is most likely Nintendo's most popular arcade game of all time, and Shigeru Miyamoto's Donkey Kong. In 1982, Nintendo made a prototype video game system called the Advanced Video System that was more like a computer than today's systems. In 1983, Nintendo brought out the Famicom, short for Family Computer, in Japan that enjoyed initial success, but then Nintendo had to recall the system due to a faulty chip. They also began discussions with Atari for Atari to release the Famicom in the US, but the partnership never materialized. Perhaps in an alternative universe, gamers are today playing the Atari U and collecting retro systems like the Super Atari, Atari 64, and Atari Cube. Nintendo brought the Famicom to the States, starting with the test market launch in New York in October of 1985. Due to the video game crash that caused the downfall of Atari, Nintendo bundled the NES with a robot and called it the Entertainment System to distance themselves from previous video game systems. They also limited developers in the number of games they could make to prevent a potential shovelware problem. The system fully launched nationwide by the end of 1986, and a little game called Super Mario Bros. Gave the video game industry a boost it desperately needed. 1989 brought us the portable powerhouse Nintendo Game Boy. It came bundled with Tetris, which helped gaming reach adults as well as kids. The 1990s pretty much ended Nintendo's presence in the arcade. After the NES came out, most of Nintendo's arcade games were versions of NES games either in Versus cabinets or Play Choice 10 cabinets that held multiple NES-style games where tokens bought you time instead of lives. However, in the early 2000s, a few Nintendo games showed up in the arcade, including F-Zero AX, which allowed users to use a GameCube memory card to use with F-Zero GX on the GameCube. The Super Famicom would also come out in Japan in 1990 and the States as the Super Nintendo in 1991, bundled with Super Mario World, which was previously called Super Mario Bros. 4. Nintendo would work on a CD add-on with Sony, with a possible name of the Nintendo PlayStation, which failed to materialize. I wonder whatever came of that. They also tried to work with Philips on a CD add-on, but that too also failed, but it did lead to Mario and Zelda showing up on the Philips CDI media system. In 1992, Nintendo bought ownership of the Seattle Mariners, which explains why Ken Griffey Jr. became the cover boy for their baseball games. 1995 brought the Virtual Boy, one of the few projects headed by Gunpei Yokoi that failed to succeed and instead gave headaches to gamers everywhere. Nintendo brought out the Nintendo 64 in 1996, which kept the cartridge format despite the fact that most system makers were switching to optical discs. Originally, the system was called the Ultra 64, but since Konami had the rights to use the name Ultra with video games, this was changed. 1998 brought us the Game Boy Color, and 2001 introduced the Game Boy Advance. The Nintendo GameCube also came out in 2001. This was Nintendo's first optical disc-based system. However, instead of CDs or DVDs, Nintendo used their own mini disc format. In 2004, Nintendo brought out the dual-screen Nintendo DS, which despite initial skepticism became very popular. 2006 brought out the motion controller-enabled Nintendo Wii, which despite initial skepticism became very popular. 2011 brought the Nintendo 3DS, which introduced 3D without glasses. Despite initial skepticism, sales, well, they were not really that great until price drop from $249 to $169 6 months later came into effect, helping lead to the popularity of the system. Finally, 2012 brought us the Wii U, whose giant controller held promise, but there's still initial skepticism and the system has failed to fully catch on at the time of this recording. Currently, Nintendo is working on a mysterious system named the NX with very little known at this time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a brief history of Nintendo. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like and subscribe, and be sure to check out some of my other videos as well covering Sega, Nintendo, Atari, and more. With over 200 episodes now posted, there's something for just about any retro fan. You can also support the show on Patreon as well. Thank you for giving me a little part of your day, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the next episode of the No Swear Gamer. Take care, everybody.